My name is Dan Dorval, and I'm President and CEO of Dorval and Cherney Financial Advisors. I am an independent certified financial planner and author of my book, Financial Success for the Rest of Us, Reality-Based Financial Planning for Mainstream America.
Hi, my name is Leah Woodley. I'm an associate financial advisor with Dorval and Cherney Financial Advisors. Our conversations discuss what it means to do quality of life planning in all areas of your life. Dan, I know it's been a busy week for us. Why don't you tell us what happened in your meetings this week?
Well, one of the more impactful meetings is a nurse that we've helped for a very long time is currently going through a divorce. And of course, a lot of times financial planning has its greatest impact when we're going through changes that aren't necessarily very good. You know, death, disability, divorce, these are common changes in life where financial planning becomes critically important. And what we're seeing in her specific situation is there's a pretty big age difference. And her husband happens to be in his 80s and she's in her 60s. So this is not a normal age difference. This is a pretty big one.
Yeah.
Well, he's had long-term care issues. He's had a history of not handling his finances very well. This is a second marriage for them. They run their finances pretty separately. They even file their taxes separately. And what's happening is they're going through a divorce in part because an estate attorney suggested they go through a divorce for her to protect her assets and income because she has a long retirement ahead of her. And if he goes into a nursing home for an extended period of time, he doesn't have any assets. He's going to be spending down her assets potentially for a long time. And that could jeopardize her quality of life in the future. So, very challenging situation, not a very pleasant situation. And we're seeing quite a few things from this. Number one is the conventional idea that in a divorce, you just split assets. You know, hey, we've been married a long
Mhm.
time, it's 50-50 type of thing. Well, what happens when somebody's got a longevity that is dramatically shorter than their spouse? And
Mhm.
lawyers apparently aren't very good at looking at that differential. And so we're involved in helping them understand what that means from, you know, an income perspective to her and to her spouse. Now, her spouse also has one of his kids is a lawyer and
Mm.
essentially is pushing this whole process to take as much as they can get from her, our client, transfer it over to him. Now, more than likely, what's going to happen is he may not live that long. He's got a potential long-term care event going on right now, and if he doesn't live that long, it's really a transfer from her over to his kids, and they have a really
Mm.
strong vested interest in doing that. So our client is leaning on us pretty heavily. And, you know, there's a few different things that I'd like to point out to our viewers. Number one is if your advisor is an investment manager, there is no help whatsoever in something like this. I mean, this is you if you call Fidelity or somebody like that and say, "Hey, you know, I'm going through this divorce. What should I do?" They're going to tell you, you know, talk to your divorce attorney and whatever else. They're not going to give you any advice or planning or whatever. Number two is because of the way that we interact with our clients through our group advisory agreements and then also the way we're compensated through our personal clients is they tend to reach out to us at the times of greatest need because we don't charge them on an hourly basis. The
Mm.
attorney charges them on an hourly basis. And what happens is they don't want to interact with their attorney because every email, every phone call, every meeting, they see how this just racks up charges and racks up charges. And it means the attorneys in many cases have a really strong vested interest to make a divorce like confrontational because that
Mhm.
makes it last longer. And the longer it
Yeah.
lasts, the more money you have to pay the attorneys. Well, in our case, they reach out, they're not being charged for these interactions. And we always have to be careful. I'm not a divorce attorney, so we always have to rely on the experts to guide those conversations. So we don't tend to charge most of our personal clients on any sort of an hourly basis because the last thing we ever want to do is discourage our clients from reaching out to us when they're in a time of greatest need.
Wow. That is such an unusual situation. I mean, have you seen this come up before in the past? This type of situation where the divorce is occurring due to a long-term care issue? Is this
Well,
something
you know, it has
that
certainly
has
been brought
come up
up
before?
before. Um, when it gets brought up, we usually defer to estate planning attorneys
Hmm. Yeah,
because there are specific, they're called elder law attorneys.
right.
They have specific expertise in that area. And we are seeing more elder law attorneys. If there's an age difference, they are recommending divorce. And I mean, think about how difficult that decision is.
Yeah,
And then it becomes one of these things where it's like, we've been together a long time and now I'm divorcing for financial reasons. Now, they had
yeah.
other problems in their marriage, so it's not just financial reasons,
Hmm.
but we are seeing it more common. Now, one of the things we see all the time is because we work with nurses, we see women going through divorce. A big trend are people in their 50s and 60s when they become empty nesters. A
Mm.
lot of people are going through divorce now. And it's right when they're in that whole retirement planning phase of getting ready to retire. And it can be devastating to their financial plan. If you have to split assets or split income sources, in many cases, now these two separate households, it's very difficult to maintain the same level of quality of life through that divorce. So, and a lot of times women in particular don't come out of these divorces very well because they end up valuing the house more than
Mm.
anything else. They want to stay in their house, especially if they have children who are still at home and they don't want to uproot like right when they're dealing with children. So they end up with the house, which is more of a liability. Now it's an asset, but
Hmm.
if there's a mortgage, it's also a liability. And
Yeah.
if I walk away as the other spouse and I don't have a liability, I can now figure out and kind of move forward without worrying about having that mortgage hanging over my head. So, yeah, we do see this a lot. It is a
Mm.
critical time for financial planning to take place. This one's pretty unique, though.
Wow. So, in this type of situation where you have two spouses with a significantly different age gap, what type of conversations would you suggest having early on before there's any problems?
Well, first off, if you have easily identifiable assets that are not necessarily part of the marriage. So in this case, she had inherited money from her dad. She inherited that money in 2006. So we're talking 18 years ago. Now, their finances are pretty separate. They file taxes separate. So it's pretty easy to identify separate assets. But what we were able to do is we were able to go back through our records. We could see that she had funded an investment account with her inheritance money.
Mm.
Then we were able to, almost do like a forensic accounting type of thing to go through, and we determined she used that account then to fund her Roth IRA. And her Roth IRA didn't have any other contributions in it. It was only the money that she funded from that inheritance. So the Roth was originally being part of the divorce, marital assets.
Mhm.
Her inheritance was considered part of the marital assets. And what we were able to do was show and provide evidence
Right.
that these assets really weren't part of this whole marital process. So that alone is going to end up potentially saving her, $50,000 or so of not having to split assets that were easily identifiable as only hers.
Right.
So if you have specific income, maybe it's a pension, a lot of our nurses have pensions. If you have specific assets, and now you're marrying somebody, specifically if you have a big age difference, but certainly even if just you're having a marriage where maybe it's a second marriage, you want to make sure that there's some agreement up front. And that could be a prenup, that could be, other sorts of agreements where clearly in writing, where those assets or income streams are protected for you.
That's great advice, especially with, as you said, divorce is on the rise. Unfortunately, that is great advice to be able to protect yourself and protect your assets. Not that anyone wants to enter into a marriage thinking about divorce. I don't think that should be the case, but it is good to be aware of things to consider and things to discuss with your spouse in the event that something does go in the wrong direction.
Well, also from an estate planning perspective,
Mm-hmm.
because what we're seeing are a lot of these, you know, it's like a second marriage. They now maybe
Mm-hmm.
have split families. So I have
Yeah.
kids from this marriage. I don't have kids with my current spouse. They have kids from a prior marriage. And it is very easy to unintentionally disinherit one side of that family if you don't consider things like estate planning. So it's not just divorce, it's also what happens when somebody dies. Also, this idea of long-term care or extended care, that becomes a critically important planning
Mm-hmm.
consideration because for this couple, if they had looked at this a long time ago, which we did look at when we first met her, but he was already in a state where his health was not great
Mm.
and his age was high enough that, they just couldn't afford long-term care insurance. And so it didn't work out very well. But if she had looked at that when they first got married,
Mm-hmm.
and if they had that resource available, there's a fairly good chance that he would have had enough resources to be able to pay for this type of event without them having to go through this extreme idea of a potential divorce, splitting of assets, splitting of income streams. So, planning ahead for these, I guess, unfortunate life events that happen
Mm-hmm.
to lots and lots of families, that's where the value comes.
Yeah. And that just goes back to what you were saying earlier that if someone's just working with an investment manager, this is not going to help them. And that's where financial planning comes into play. Financial planning covers so many various aspects of your lives that sometimes people don't consider and people don't think about. It's not just about growing your portfolio, there are so many other facets to financial planning.
Well, most of our conversations, we talk about puzzle pieces all the time and having to
Mhm.
put those puzzle pieces together. It's like 4D chess compared to somebody playing checkers, because just
Yes.
looking at an investment portfolio and saying, "Hey, it's going up right now, that's great," or "It's going down right now, what do I do?" That's probably the easiest thing we do. And most of our conversations really spend almost no time on the nuts and bolts of investing. That's what we need to do for our clients, but our conversations are much more focused on the real value adds that put those puzzle pieces together for our clients.
Absolutely. And earlier in the conversation, you mentioned forensic accounting, and I was having a conversation with someone else, and forensic accounting came up as well. And then that situation, it was a divorce as well. And one of the spouses was trying to hide money. So they would file their taxes and then do an amended return so that they weren't showing, they would provide that initial tax return and then would do an amended return to try to hide money. So divorces can be extremely messy, divorces can be extremely ugly. But when you do have someone who is working on your behalf, being a fiduciary, as we're called to be, um, those kind of situations can be identified and hopefully mitigated.
Well, we had a nurse come in, and not this week, but the prior week, where she she had gone through a divorce a number of years ago, and it was a gambling addiction with her spouse.
Mm,
And he was hiding money, was not being upfront about all the damage he was doing to their finances. And she essentially has, PTSD from
mm,
that whole situation. And when she walked into our office and started to meet with us, she started crying before we ever talked. And it was a very difficult thing for her to face her finances. But now she's in another relationship.
mm,
She's looking at potentially getting married, and she's scared.
mm. And that's unfortunate. It's really sad that past trauma can impact, your future and what's going on now. Hopefully she can get past that and hopefully this relationship is healthy.
Well, that's what financial planning is all about.
Yes. Well, it was great talking to you. It was great talking about a topic that impacts a lot of people, and hopefully this can help someone and be beneficial to them. Until next time. Bye.
Thanks, Leah.
Thank you.